The mining station Kepler 442 floated in the darkness between stars, its massive industrial arms slowly rotating as they processed asteroids into valuable minerals. To most beings in the galaxy, it looked like just another corporate operation. But Commander Zexhai of the Veltar Empire knew better. This station was humanity's lifeline, feeding raw materials to their stubborn colonies that refused to bow to superior alien rule. Zexhai's 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched the tactical display. 12 Veltar warships surrounded the station, their weapons charged and ready. The humans inside had nowhere to run. Soon, this pathetic outpost would be another trophy in the Empire's expansion across the galaxy. Signal from a station, Commander, reported his communications officer, a nervous Scrix whose scales rippled with anxiety. Put it through, Zexhai commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. The hologram flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and tired eyes. Station Commander Maria Santos looked older than her files indicated, worn down by the endless pressure of running a frontier operation. This is Commander Santos of Mining Station Kepler 442, she said, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. State your intentions. Zexhai laughed, a harsh sound that made his bridge crew flinch. Human, you are surrounded by the might of the Veltar Empire. Surrender your station immediately, and your deaths will be quick. Santos's jaw tightened. We're a civilian mining operation. We have families here, children. Under galactic law, Zexhai interrupted, rising from his command throne. The only law that matters is strength, and you humans are weak. You have 1 hour to evacuate, or we will take the station by force. The transmission ended abruptly. Zexhai turned to his tactical officer, a brutish Korthak whose tusks gleamed in the bridge lighting. Prepare boarding parties. These humans will learn what happens when they defy the Empire. Inside the station, Maria Santos stood in the command center, surrounded by her staff. The mining station housed 300 civilians, including 50 children. The nearest human military base was 6 days away, far too long to wait for rescue. Her small security force of 20 guards couldn't hope to stand against Veltar shock troopers. Commander, what are our options? Asked Dr. Kim Tanaka, the station's chief engineer. His hands shook slightly as he spoke, the weight of the situation clear on his face. Maria looked at the tactical display, showing the alien ships. Each Veltar vessel was 3 times larger than their entire station, bristling with weapons that could turn them to space dust in seconds. But something nagged at her memory, something her son had mentioned during his last communication. There's someone we can call, she said slowly. Someone who might help. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Williams, looked up hopefully. Human fleet assets in the sector? Not exactly, Maria said, moving to her personal terminal. My son Marcus works with unusual contractors. There's a man who takes jobs others won't. They call him the Reaper. The bridge fell silent. Everyone in human space had heard whispers about the Reaper, a lone operative who worked the frontier zones. Some said he was a ghost story. Others claimed he was humanity's secret weapon. Most believed he was just another mercenary with good marketing. Commander, Williams said carefully, even if he exists, he's just one man. How could one person help against 12 warships? Maria's fingers moved across the keyboard, sending an encrypted message to coordinates her son had given her months ago. I don't know, she admitted, but we're out of options. The message raced across subspace, traveling faster than light through the quantum foam that connected distant stars. It reached a small, unremarkable ship drifting in the shadow of a dead moon, seemingly abandoned except for the faint energy signature of minimal life support. Inside the ship's cramped bridge, Captain Jake Morrison sat in meditation, his breathing slow and controlled. To outside observers, he appeared completely ordinary, a tall, lean human with brown hair and weathered features that spoke of years in space. But his stillness held the coiled tension of a predator at rest. The message alert chimed softly. Jake's eyes opened, ice blue orbs that seemed to hold depths of cold space itself. He read the distress signal once, then, again, processing every detail with mechanical precision. Mining Station Kepler, 442. 300 civilians. 12 Veltor or ships. 1 hour until attack. Jake stood and moved through his ship, each step purposeful. The vessel looked small and unremarkable from outside, but its interior told a different story. Hidden compartments revealed weapons that shouldn't exist, armor that defied known technology, and computers that hummed with processing power beyond military grade. He pulled up the tactical situation, studying the Veltar formation with the eye of someone who understood war at its most fundamental level. The aliens had positioned their ships in a classic intimidation pattern, designed to project maximum psychological impact while maintaining overwhelming firepower. It was textbook Imperial doctrine, which meant it was predictable. Jake smiled, and something cold and terrible flickered in his expression. He began suiting up an armor that seemed to drink in light, each piece locking into place with barely audible clicks. The suit's heads-up display came online, feeding him sensor data from across the system. His ship's AI, voice synthesized to sound like his long-dead sister, began running tactical calculations. 12 ships, Jake, Sarah's voice whispered in his ear. That's a lot, even for you. The Veltar made a mistake, he replied, checking his weapons. Each piece was a work of art, crafted by master weaponsmiths, and enhanced with technology that pushed the boundaries of physics. They brought too many ships. How is 12 ships too many? Jake sealed his helmet and moved to the pilot's seat. His ship, the Nemesis, began powering up systems that had been dormant for months. Engines that ran on principles the galaxy's greatest scientists couldn't understand hummed to life. Weapons that existed in the spaces between atoms began charging. Because now they can't run away without looking like cowards, Jake said, plotting a course toward Kepler, 442. And the Veltar hate looking weak more than they hate dying. The Nemesis slipped out of the moon's shadow, its stealth systems making it effectively invisible to standard sensors. Jake had spent years perfecting those systems, incorporating technology salvaged from a dozen different species and enhanced with human ingenuity. To the rest of the galaxy, his ship simply didn't exist. As he traveled toward the mining station, Jake reviewed what he knew about the Veltar Empire. They were a proud, militaristic species that had conquered dozens of worlds through superior technology and ruthless tactics. They saw other species as inferior, suitable only for slavery or extinction. Humans, with their stubborn independence and tendency to fight impossible odds, particularly annoyed them. The Veltar had 3 major advantages: superior numbers, advanced technology, and a warrior culture that bred fearless soldiers. But they also had weaknesses that few beings understood. Their rigid hierarchy made them predictable, their pride made them reckless, and their contempt for other species made them underestimate their enemies. Jake had made a career of exploiting those weaknesses. The journey to Kepler, 442, took 6 hours at maximum burn. Jake used the time to meditate, reviewing tactical scenarios and preparing his mind for what was to come. The galaxy saw him as the Reaper, a force of nature that appeared without warning to settle humanity's debts with alien blood. But Jake knew the truth. He was just a man who had lost everything and chosen to make that loss mean something. His family had died in a Veltar raid 5 years ago. His wife, his daughter, his parents, all murdered for the crime of living on a world the Empire wanted. Jake had been off-world on a cargo run, arriving home just in time to find their bodies in the smoking ruins of their house. The human government had offered condolences and compensation. The Galactic Council had filed formal protests. The Veltar had claimed it was a regrettable mistake and offered to pay damages. Jake had chosen a different path. As a Nemesis approached the edge of the Kepler 442 system, Jake began deploying his reconnaissance drones. The tiny devices, no larger than insects, spread out across space with careful precision. They would give him perfect intelligence on the enemy formation, showing him every ship, every weapon, every vulnerability. The tactical picture that emerged made him nod with grim satisfaction. The Veltar commander had positioned his ships exactly as Doctrine demanded, but Doctrine assumed the enemy would fight conventionally. Jake had long ago abandoned conventional thinking. He opened a secure channel to the mining station, his transmission encrypted with codes that would take the Veltar centuries to crack. Station Kepler, 442, this is Morrison, he said simply. Help is coming. On the station, Maria Santos nearly collapsed with relief when she heard the transmission. The voice was calm, professional, and carried an undertone of absolute confidence that made her believe, despite all logic, that salvation might actually be possible. Morrison, this is Commander Santos. We have 12 Veltar ships surrounding us. They've given us 1 hour to surrender. Understood, Jake replied. In 30 minutes, take all civilians to the station's central core and activate emergency blast shields. Keep your security team at battle stations, but tell them not to engage unless directly fired upon. Things are going to get loud. The channel closed, leaving Maria staring at her communications console. Lieutenant Williams looked at her with barely contained hope. Commander, is he really going to try to take on 12 warships by himself? Maria thought about her son's stories, about the whispered legends that traveled through human space. The Reaper always worked alone. The Reaper never left witnesses among his enemies. The Reaper had never lost a contract. I don't think he's going to try, she said quietly. I think he's going to do it. Aboard the Veltar flagship, Commander HFY paced impatiently. The human hour was nearly up, and still the mining station showed no signs of surrender. His crew was growing restless, eager for the violence that would prove their superiority once again. Sir, his sensor officer called out, I'm detecting some unusual readings at the edge of the system. Very faint, possibly sensor ghosts. HFY wave, dies me seen. Human space is full of their primitive probe networks. Ignore it and focus on the target. It was a mistake that would cost him everything. In the darkness between the stars, Jake Morrison studied his enemy through the eyes of a dozen drones. He had identified the flagship, mapped the formation's weak points, and calculated firing solutions within human precision. The Veltar had made this easy by following their doctrine so precisely. The first Veltar ship died without ever knowing it was under attack. Jake Morrison's opening salvo came from 3 different angles simultaneously, his micro-drones releasing concentrated plasma bursts that struck the destroyer's reactor core with surgical precision. The explosion lit up space for 10,000 kilometers, sending a shockwave through the alien formation that shattered their perfect tactical arrangement. Contact! Unknown enemy vessel, screamed the sensor officer aboard Commander HFY's flagship. The Wrath's vengeance just exploded. HFY spun toward his tactical display, his 4 eyes wide with shock. One of his ships was gone, simply gone, and the sensor showed no sign of whatever had destroyed it. Impossible. Run full-spectrum analysis. Find me that ship. But Jake Morrison was already moving. The Nemesis slipped through space like a ghost, its stealth systems bending sensor waves around its hull while its pilot planned his next kill. Jake had studied Veltar psychology for 5 years, learning their weaknesses, understanding their fears. The Empire's warriors were brave when facing a visible enemy, but invisible death terrified them. His second target was the formation's communications relay ship, a vessel whose destruction would cripple the aliens' ability to coordinate their response. Jake's torpedo struck it amidships, the warhead designed not to destroy but to disable. The ship went dark, its crew trapped inside a vessel that had become their tomb. 2 ships down, Jake whispered to his ship's AI. 10 to go. They're starting to panic, Sarah's synthesized voice replied. Look at their formation. They're breaking doctrine. Jake smiled grimly as he watched the Veltar ships scatter, their perfect battle line dissolving into chaos. Fear was a weapon more powerful than any gun, and Jake wielded it like a master craftsman. Each attack was calculated not just for military effect, but for psychological impact. The third kill, came from below, Jake's ship rising from beneath the orbital plane like a predator from the depths. His railgun, firing projectiles at nearly light speed, punched through the cruiser's shields and hull like they were made of paper. The ship's back broke, its two halves spinning away in different directions. "There!" shouted the tactical officer on Zexhi's bridge. "Bearing 27 Mark 15. I have a contact." But by the time the Veltar weapons swiveled toward the reading, Jake was already gone, vanished back into the darkness between the stars. The aliens fired anyway, their energy beams creating a light show that illuminated empty space, while their true enemy circled them like a wolf stalking sheep. Commander Zexhi slammed his fist against his command throne, his carefully maintained composure cracking under the pressure of fighting an enemy he couldn't see. "This is impossible. One ship cannot defeat the might of the Empire." His communications officer looked up from her station, fear evident in her posture. "Sir, I'm receiving requests for assistance from the remaining vessels." "Should I know?" "Zexhi Zhao, we do not call for help. We are Veltar. We do not run from a single human." It was exactly what Jake had expected. Veltar pride was legendary throughout the galaxy, and that pride would keep them here until the last ship was destroyed. They would rather die than admit they had been defeated by what they considered an inferior species. Jake's fourth attack targeted the ammunition ship, a converted freighter carrying the ordnance needed to sustain a long siege. His hacking programs, developed through years of studying alien computer systems, wormed their way past the ship's firewalls and triggered a cascade failure in its magazine. The explosion was so massive it took two nearby escorts with it, turning 3 ships into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. 6 ships remaining, Jake muttered, checking his own ammunition levels. The Nemesis carried an impressive arsenal for such a small vessel, but fighting 12 enemy ships was pushing even his resources to their limits. He would have to be more creative with his remaining attacks. The Veltar formation was in complete disarray now, ships firing at shadows while their crews jumped at every sensor ghost. Jake could hear their communications chatter over his monitoring equipment, voices filled with confusion and growing fear. They had never faced an enemy like this, an opponent who struck without warning and vanished before they could retaliate. Jake's next target was psychological rather than tactical. He selected the youngest ship captain in the formation, a newly promoted officer commanding his first vessel. The attack came from multiple angles, drone strikes that disabled weapons while Jake's voice hacked into their communications. "This is the Reaper," he said, his words cutting through their channels like ice. "Your empire sent you to die for their pride. Do you really want to follow orders into oblivion?" The young captain lasted 3 minutes before ordering his crew to abandon ship. Their escape pods ejected in all directions, carrying tales that would spread through the Empire like wildfire. Stories of invisible death, of a human who fought like a demon, of how the mighty Veltar fled before a single enemy vessel. "Coward!" Zexhi screamed over the communication channels. "I'll have you executed for this." But the damage was done. Fear was spreading through the remaining ships like a virus, eroding the discipline that held their formation together. Jake could see it in their flight patterns, in the way their weapons tracked empty space, in the increasingly frantic chatter on their communications. The 5th kill was almost artistic in its precision. Jake had positioned micromines throughout the area during his initial approach, invisible weapons waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the destroyer grinding Fong moved to reposition, it passed through the minefield at exactly the wrong moment. The chain reaction tore the ship apart from the inside out, its hull cracking like an egg before exploding in brilliant white fire. 4 ships left, Commander Zexhi's flagship and 3 escorts, all that remained of what had once been an overwhelming force. Jake could see them huddled together now, their formation tight and defensive. They were no longer hunters. They had become prey. "Sir," the communications officer said hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider withdrawing. We could call for reinforcements," and Zexhi's hand moved faster than thought, striking the officer across the face hard enough to send her sprawling. "We do not retreat. We do not call for help. We finish this." But even as he spoke, HFY could feel his certainty cracking. In all his years of service, in all the battles he had fought for the Empire, he had never faced anything like this. The human was playing with them, taking them apart piece by piece like a child dismantling a toy. On Mining Station Kepler, 442, Commander Maria Santos watched the battle through her station's telescopes, hardly believing what she was seeing. The Veltar formation that had seemed so invincible was dissolving before her eyes, ships exploding or going dark one by one. The mysterious Morrison was delivering on his promise in the most spectacular way possible. "Commander," Lieutenant Williams said, his voice filled with awe, "I'm reading 4 enemy vessels remaining. How is he doing this?" Maria shook her head, remembering her son's words about the Reaper. "I don't think anyone knows," she replied. "Maybe that's the point." In the depths of space, Jake Morrison was preparing for the final phase of his attack. The remaining Veltar ships were clustered together now, their overlapping shields creating a defensive barrier that would be difficult to penetrate directly. But Jake had learned long ago that the best way to defeat a strong defense was not to attack it head-on. He activated a special weapon system that he had spent 2 years developing, technology that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. The gravitational disruptor was his masterpiece, a device that could create localized distortions in space-time. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and completely invisible to enemy sensors. The weapon fired, sending ripples through the fabric of reality itself. Space twisted around the Veltar formation, gravity wells appearing and disappearing in patterns that defied comprehension. 2 of the escort ships were caught in the effect, their hulls crushed like tin cans as gravitational forces beyond their designer's imagination tore them apart. Now only 2 ships remained, HFY's flagship and 1 escort. Jake could see them clearly now, their hulls scarred by debris, their weapons systems desperately trying to track a target they couldn't find. The aliens were defeated, but their pride wouldn't let them surrender. Jake opened a communication channel to the flagship. "Commander HFY of the Veltar Empire," he said, his voice calm and professional. "You have lost. Withdraw now, and your remaining crews will live." The response came immediately, HFY's voice filled with rage and desperation. "I am commander of the 5th Fleet. I do not surrender to inferior beings. Face me, coward. Fight me with honor." Jake considered the request for a moment. He could finish both ships from the shadows, complete his mission without ever revealing himself. But something in the alien commander's voice reminded him of his own rage, his own desperate need for vengeance after losing everything he loved. "Very well," Jake said quietly. "You want to see me? Here I am." The Nemesis dropped its stealth systems and appeared directly in front of the Veltar flagship, its sleek black hull gleaming in the starlight. The ship was beautiful in its deadliness, every line designed for both function and intimidation. It looked like death given form, like vengeance made manifest. On the Veltar bridge, absolute silence fell as the crew stared at their tormentor. The human ship was smaller than their smallest escort, a tiny vessel that should have been crushed instantly by their superior firepower. But they all knew, with the terrible certainty of the defeated, that size meant nothing against an enemy like this. "Impossible," HFY whispered, his 4 eyes fixed on the human vessel. "1 ship, 1 human. How?" Jake Morrison's voice came through their speakers, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Because you misjudged us, Commander. You thought humans were weak because we prefer peace. You thought we were inferior because we value cooperation over conquest. But you forgot the most important thing about humanity." "What?" HFY asked despite himself. "We're very good at learning from our mistakes," Jake replied. "And you've been our teacher for 5 long years." The Nemesis's weapons powered up, energy signatures that made the Veltar's most advanced sensors scream warnings. Jake had saved his most powerful weapons for last, systems that drew on exotic physics and technologies that the Empire scientists could barely understand. "This is for every human world you've burned," Jake said quietly. "For every family you've destroyed. For everyone who died because you thought might made right." The final battle lasted exactly 37 seconds. Jake Morrison, who had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, unleashed hell itself upon his enemies. The Veltar flagship, pride of the Fifth Fleet, simply ceased to exist. The escort lasted 3 seconds longer before joining its commander in oblivion. When the light faded, only the Nemesis remained, floating in space, surrounded by the debris of an entire battle group. Jake sat in his pilot's chair, breathing heavily as the adrenaline slowly left his system. Another debt had been paid, another message sent to the Empire. But he knew this was just the beginning. The Veltar would send more ships, larger fleets, better commanders. They would hunt him across the galaxy until one of them died. And Jake Morrison was perfectly fine with that. He opened a channel to Mining Station Kepler 442. "Station Commander Santos, this is Morrison. The immediate threat has been neutralized. I recommend you evacuate your position within 6 hours. The Empire will send another fleet." Maria Santos's voice came through clearly, filled with gratitude and disbelief. "Morrison, how can we ever thank you? You saved 300 lives today." Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking of his own family, of the lives he hadn't been able to save. "Just take care of those children, Commander. Make sure they grow up free." As the Nemesis prepared to depart, Jake began planning his next move. The Veltar Empire stretched across dozens of star systems, its military bases and supply lines scattered throughout known space. Each base was a potential target, each supply convoy a chance to strike back at the alien oppressors. The Empire had awakened something they didn't understand when they murdered Jake Morrison's family. They had created their own nemesis, a force of vengeance that would hunt them until justice was served. And Jake Morrison, the man they would learn to call the Reaper, was just getting started. High Admiral Kesvara of the Veltar Imperial Navy stood before the strategic hologram, her scaled hands clenched behind her back as she studied the latest intelligence reports. The destruction of the Fifth Fleet had sent shockwaves through the Empire's military hierarchy, and now every naval commander was demanding answers she didn't have. 12 ships, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in service. 12 of our finest vessels destroyed by a single human. How is this possible? Fleet Intelligence Officer Dracor shuffled nervously, his tusks clicking against each other in a display of anxiety. "High Admiral, our analysis suggests the human vessel possesses technology far beyond their known capabilities. The attack patterns were unlike anything in our tactical databases." Kesvara turned from the hologram, her 4 eyes reflecting the cold light of the war room's displays. She was old for a Veltar, her scales bearing the silver of age and experience, but her mind remained sharp as a plasma blade. "This was not random destruction, officer. This was a message. The question is, what is this human trying to tell us?" Before Dracor could answer, an aide rushed into the room, his young face pale with fear. "High Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the sector. 3 supply convoys have been destroyed in the past week. The 4th Patrol Squadron has gone missing." And he paused, swallowing hard. "Base Nexus 7 has ceased all communications." Silence fell over the war room like a shroud. Base Nexus 7 was a fortress world protected by orbital defense platforms and a full garrison. If it had fallen, then the situation was far worse than anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, in the shadow of a dead moon 3 systems away, Jake Morrison worked methodically to maintain his ship. The Nemesis floated in the darkness, its stealth systems active while its pilot performed the careful rituals that kept a warrior alive in hostile space. Jake moved through his vessel with practiced efficiency, checking weapons systems, reviewing intelligence reports, planning his next strike. The ship's interior was Spartanly functional, every surface bearing the marks of constant use and careful maintenance. This was not a pleasure craft. It was a weapon, and like all weapons, it required constant attention to remain effective. "Jake," Sarah's voice whispered through the ship's speakers, "you've been pushing hard for 3 weeks. What was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Jake paused in his inspection of the gravitational disruptor, considering the question. Time had become fluid since he'd begun his war against the Empire, measured not in days or weeks, but in targets destroyed and debts repaid. "I'll sleep when they're all dead," he said simply. "That's not sustainable," Sarah replied, her tone carrying the gentle concern of a sister who had died 5 years ago. "You're human, Jake. You have limits." "So did they," Jake said, thinking of his family. But that didn't stop the Veltar from killing them. He returned to his work, but Sarah's words lingered in his mind. The AI was right. He was pushing himself to the breaking point. But every day he delayed, every hour he rested, the Empire grew stronger. More ships were built, more worlds conquered, more families destroyed. He couldn't afford to stop, not when he was finally making progress. The intelligence reports on his desk told a story of growing fear within the Veltar military. Supply convoys now traveled with heavy escorts. Patrol schedules had become random and unpredictable. Base commanders were requesting additional defenses for installations that had been considered impregnable just months before. Good. Fear was a weapon, and Jake wielded it with surgical precision. His next target was already selected. A supply depot on the edge of Veltar space, a facility that supported their expansion into human territory. The depot was heavily defended, with orbital platforms and a garrison of elite troops. But Jake had spent weeks studying its defenses, identifying weaknesses that its designers had never imagined. As the Nemesis began its journey toward the target, Jake reviewed what he had learned about Veltar psychology during his 5 years of preparation. The Empire's warriors were brave, but rigid, following doctrine even when circumstances demanded flexibility. They respected strength, but feared the unknown. Most importantly, they could not comprehend how a single human could challenge their entire military machine. That incomprehension was their greatest weakness. The journey to the supply depot took 2 days at maximum burn. Jake used the time to meditate and planned, preparing his mind for the battle ahead. The depot was different from his previous targets, larger, better defended, and strategically critical. Its destruction would cripple Veltar operations in this sector for months. As he approached the target system, Jake deployed his reconnaissance drones, the tiny devices spreading out to map every defensive installation and patrol route. The depot hung in space like a metal spider, its arms extending to massive storage tanks while defensive platforms surrounded it in carefully calculated patterns. Jake studied the tactical display with the eye of a professional. The Veltar had learned from his previous attacks, adapting their defenses to counter his stealth capabilities. Sensor nets swept space in overlapping patterns, while fast patrol ships moved in random courses designed to intercept any approaching vessel. It was impressive, but it wasn't enough. Jake began his attack at the system's edge, targeting the early warning stations that would alert the depot to his presence. His micro-torpedoes, no larger than bullets, slipped through space undetected until they struck their targets. One by one, the sensor platforms went dark, creating holes in the Empire's awareness. The attack on the depot itself began 3 hours later. Jake had positioned himself above the orbital plane, where the defender's attention was focused on traditional approach vectors. His first strike targeted the communication relays, cutting the depot off from outside assistance. No one would escape to carry word of what was about to happen. Commander Yexdal of the depot's garrison was reviewing supply manifests when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the command center in red light while alarms screamed their warnings. "Report," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Sir, we've lost all external communications," his communications officer replied, her hands flying over her console. "Something took out our primary relay array. And the backup systems? Also down, sir. Whatever hit us was surgically precise." Yexdal felt cold fear creep up his spine. He had read the reports from Kepler 442, had studied the analysis of the mysterious human who called himself the Reaper. The attack patterns were unmistakable, precise, invisible, and utterly ruthless. Sound general quarters, he ordered. All defense platforms to maximum alert. Launch all patrol squadrons. And give me a direct line to high command. But it was already too late. Jake Morrison was inside their defensive perimeter, his ship invisible to their sensors as it moved like death through the void. His second wave of attacks targeted the patrol ships, catching them as they launched from their base. Explosions blossomed against the depot's hull as one fighter after another died before its pilot could even identify the threat. The defensive platforms fared no better. Jake's weapons had evolved since his first encounter with the Veltar, incorporating technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Quantum torpedoes phased through shields as if they didn't exist. Particle beams bent space itself to strike targets that should have been protected. From his command center, Yexdal watched his carefully planned defenses collapse with terrifying speed. 24 patrol ships destroyed in as many minutes. 6 defensive platforms reduced to scrap metal. And still, his sensors couldn't locate the enemy vessel. "Where is he?" Yexdal demanded, his voice rising in desperation. "How can one ship do this?" His tactical officer, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, shook her head in disbelief. "Sir, I'm reading weapon signatures that don't match anything in our databases. The energy outputs alone should require a vessel 3 times the size of our largest battleship." "Impossible," Yexdal snapped. "Human technology is inferior to ours. Their ships are weak, their weapons primitive." But even as he spoke, another explosion rocked the depot. Jake had begun targeting the storage tanks now, each strike carefully calculated to create maximum psychological impact. The massive containers ruptured one by one, spilling their contents into space in spectacular displays of light and energy. Jake Morrison moved through the battle with cold precision, each attack planned and executed with mechanical perfection. This was not anger. It was justice, delivered with the inevitability of natural law. The Veltar had chosen to make themselves his enemies when they murdered his family. Now, they would learn the price of that choice. The depot's garrison fought back with desperate courage, their remaining weapons filling space with energy beams and projectiles. But they were firing at shadows, wasting ammunition on sensor ghosts while their real enemy moved among them like a specter of death. When the fuel depot exploded, the blast could be seen from 3 star systems away. The explosion triggered a chain reaction that consumed half the facility, turning millions of tons of refined fuel into a miniature star that burned for 6 hours before finally guttering out. Yexdal and his surviving crew found themselves trapped in the depot's central section, their ship bays destroyed and their escape pods damaged beyond repair. Emergency force fields held back the vacuum of space, but their life support had only hours remaining. It was then that Jake Morrison's voice came through their emergency channels, clear and calm in the midst of chaos. "Commander Yexdal," Jake said, his words cutting through the static of damaged communications. "You have something that belongs to me." "What?" Yexdal replied, his voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. "What could we possibly have that belongs to you?" "Information," Jake said simply. "The location of High Admiral Kesvara's headquarters. The shipping schedules for your next supply convoys. The defensive plans for your core worlds." Yexdal laughed bitterly. "And why would I give you any of that? You're going to kill us anyway." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But if you cooperate, your crew gets to live. I'll give you enough time to reach the escape pods before I finish destroying this facility. If you don't," he paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Well, space is very cold, Commander, and very empty." The command center fell silent as Yexdal considered his options. He was a career military officer, trained from birth to serve the Empire without question. Giving information to an enemy was treason of the highest order. But he was also responsible for the lives of his crew, and Jake Morrison had just demonstrated what happened to those who defied him. How do I know you'll keep your word? Yexdal asked finally. You don't, Jake replied. But I'm the only chance your people have of seeing tomorrow. 5 minutes later, Jake had everything he needed. Shipping schedules, base locations, fleet movements, intelligence that would let him strike at the heart of Veltar power in this sector. He kept his word, giving the survivors time to reach their escape pods before completing the depot's destruction. As he watched the facility's final moments, Jake felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. This was simply another step on a journey that would end only when every debt was paid, when every Veltar who had participated in his family's murder was dead. But the war was escalating now. High Admiral Kesvara would not ignore the loss of an entire supply depot. Larger fleets would come, more sophisticated defenses would be constructed. The Empire would adapt, as all organisms adapted when faced with an existential threat. Jake smiled grimly as he plotted course for his next target. Let them adapt. Let them bring their finest ships, their best commanders, their most advanced technology. He had spent 5 years preparing for this war, and he was ready for whatever they could throw at him. The Veltar Empire had awakened a monster they couldn't understand, and Jake Morrison was about to show them exactly what that meant. The hunt was just beginning, and before it was over, they would all learn to fear the night sky. In her flagship high above the Veltar homeworld, High Admiral Kesvara received the news of the depot's destruction with grim resignation. This human, this Reaper, was no longer just a nuisance. He was a threat to the Empire itself. Double all patrol schedules, she ordered. Increase escort strength for all supply convoys. And send word to Fleet Command. I want every available ship in this sector. It's time to end this. Her aide nodded nervously. Yes, High Admiral. What should we tell the crews? How do we prepare them to fight an enemy they can't see? Kesvara stared out at the stars, thinking of the reports she had read. The impossible destruction that one human had wrought. Tell them the truth, she said finally. Tell them they're hunting a ghost, and ghosts can only be defeated by those who aren't afraid of the dark. The trap was perfect. High Admiral Kesvara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Stellar Dominance, and surveyed the massive fleet arrayed before her. 237 vessels hung in space around the strategic world of Nexus Prime, their hulls gleaming in the light of the system's twin stars. Every ship type in the Veltar arsenal was represented. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, and specialized hunter-killer vessels designed specifically to counter stealth technology. Admiral, reported her tactical officer, all ships are in position. The sensor net is active and showing full coverage. If the human enters this system, we will detect him. Kesvara nodded, her 4 eyes reflecting the tactical display. She had spent 3 months planning this operation, using the Empire's finest strategic minds to design a trap that no single ship could escape. The bait was irresistible. Nexus Prime housed the sector's primary military command center, coordinating Veltar operations across 24 systems. If the Reaper wanted to hurt the Empire, he would have to come here. What's the status of our special weapons? She asked. All gravitational interdict fields are online, the weapons officer replied. The moment the human ship is detected, we can prevent him from escaping to hyperspace. Our new quantum tracking systems are also active. Even his stealth technology won't help him once we get a sensor lock. Kesvara allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The Empire's scientists had worked tirelessly to develop countermeasures for the humans' impossible technology. They had studied every attack, analyzed every weapon signature, and created systems specifically designed to neutralize his advantages. The Reaper had been successful because he fought alone against unprepared enemies. Today, he would face the full might of the Imperial Navy. But Jake Morrison was not coming to Nexus Prime. 3 systems away, the Nemesis drifted in the shadow of a gas giant's rings, its stealth systems hiding it among the ice and rock debris. Jake sat in his command chair, studying intelligence reports that painted a clear picture of the Veltar's preparations. They had assembled the largest fleet in the sector's history, all to catch one human ship. "It's impressive," Sarah's voice observed through the ship's speakers. 200 ships, all for you. I think you've made an impression." Jake smiled grimly as he reviewed the tactical data his spy drones had gathered. "They're learning, but they're still thinking conventionally. Kesvara believes this is about military targets and strategic objectives. Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "No," Jake replied, his voice carrying a note of cold certainty. "This is about family, about the people they killed, about making them understand that there are consequences for their actions." He pulled up another set of data, shipping schedules, patrol routes, and personnel records gathered from his previous raids. While the Empire's finest fleet waited in ambush at Nexus Prime, their real vulnerabilities lay elsewhere. The massive fleet concentration had stripped defenses from dozens of other locations, creating opportunities that Jake intended to exploit. His real target was the Veltar Military Academy on Corvith 3. The academy was where the Empire trained its future officers, where young Veltar learned to see other species as inferior and conquest as destiny. It housed 3,000 cadets, the sons and daughters of the Empire's elite, future commanders who would spread Veltar domination across the galaxy. Jake began plotting his course, calculating jump coordinates and fuel consumption. The academy was defended, but lightly. Most of its protection came from the assumption that no enemy would be foolish enough to attack such a heavily populated target. The Veltar couldn't imagine that their enemy might prioritize psychological impact over military efficiency. They were about to learn differently. The journey to Corvith 3 took 4 days through hyperspace. Jake used the time to prepare specialized equipment for this mission. Weapons designed for precision rather than destruction. Tools meant to terrorize rather than kill. He had no interest in slaughtering children, but the Empire needed to understand that their leadership's families were not safe from the consequences of their actions. As the Nemesis dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Corvith system, Jake deployed his reconnaissance drones with practiced efficiency. The Academy orbited the planet's largest moon, a sprawling complex of training facilities, barracks, and administrative buildings. Its defenses consisted of a small patrol squadron and orbital defense platforms, impressive by civilian standards, but laughably inadequate against what was coming. Jake began his approach under full stealth, using the system's asteroid belt as cover while his ship's sensors mapped every defensive installation. The Academy's patrol ships followed predictable routes, their crews complacent in the belief that the war was happening far away. They had no idea that death was already among them. The attack began at 0300 local time, when most of the Academy's staff would be asleep. Jake's first strike targeted the communication arrays, cutting the facility off from outside contact with surgical precision. His micro-torpedoes slipped through the Academy's shields and destroyed key transmission nodes, leaving the defenders isolated and alone. Commandant Hextar was awakened by the emergency alarms that echoed through the Academy's corridors. A veteran of 30 years' service, he had trained thousands of officers for the Imperial Navy, but he had never expected to face combat himself. The Academy was supposed to be safe, protected by its distance from the frontier and its status as a training facility. "Report," he commanded as he rushed into the command center, still adjusting his uniform. "Sir, we've lost all external communications," his aide replied, her young face pale with fear. "Something hit our primary transmission array. All backup systems are also down." "Patrol status?" "We've lost contact with Squadron 7. The tactical officer reported. Squadron 9 is reporting unusual sensor readings, but can't identify the source." Hextar felt cold understanding wash over him. Every officer in the Imperial Navy had heard about the Reaper, the human ghost who struck without warning and vanished like smoke. But the Academy was hundreds of light years from the frontier. How could he have found them here? "Sound general quarters," Hextar ordered. "Lock down all facilities and prepare for evacuation." "If this is who I think it is," the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the command center in red light, while backup systems struggled to maintain basic functions. Through the viewports, Hextar could see explosions blossoming around the academy as patrol ships died in balls of fire. The enemy was already inside their defensive perimeter, killing with mechanical precision. Jake Morrison moved through the battle like a force of nature, his ship invisible to their sensors while his weapons reached out to claim target after target. But this attack was different from his previous raids. Instead of simply destroying everything in sight, he was being selective, methodical. Each strike was calculated for maximum psychological impact. He disabled the Academy's main power grid, plunging sections of the facility into darkness. He destroyed their shuttle bays, trapping the cadets and staff inside the complex. He took out their defensive platforms one by one, making it clear that resistance was futile. But he didn't target the habitation sections or training areas where the cadets slept. Not yet. Instead, Jake began broadcasting on the Academy's internal communication system, his voice echoing through every corridor and dormitory. "Attention cadets of the Veltar Military Academy," he said, his words calm and professional despite the chaos around him. "My name is Jake Morrison. Some of you may know me as the Reaper. I'm here to teach you a lesson that your instructors haven't covered." In the Academy's dormitories, 3,000 young Veltar huddled in their beds, listening to the voice of their empire's greatest enemy. Many had never been in combat, had never faced death outside of training simulations. Now they were experiencing terror in its purest form. 5 years ago, Jake continued, "Your empire attacked a human colony called New Hope. 300,000 civilians died in that raid, including my wife and daughter. They were murdered for the crime of living on a world your leaders wanted." Explosions continued to echo through the facility as Jake's weapons systematically dismantled the Academy's defenses. Each blast was a punctuation mark in his speech, a reminder that death was stalking the corridors. "Your instructors teach you that other species are inferior," Jake said. "That strength gives you the right to take whatever you want. They tell you that the Empire's enemies are weak and cowardly. I'm here to correct those misconceptions." Commandant Hextar tried desperately to restore communications, to call for help from the main fleet. But Jake's jamming systems were too sophisticated, his electronic warfare capabilities too advanced. The Academy was completely cut off from outside assistance. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "what do we do? How do we fight someone we can't see?" Before Hextar could answer, Jake's voice filled the command center again. "Commandant Hextar," the human said, somehow knowing exactly who was listening. "You trained the officers who killed my family. You taught them that human lives were worthless. Now you're going to learn what it feels like to be helpless." The remaining defense platforms exploded in sequence, the destruction lighting up the space around the Academy like fireworks. Jake was systematically removing every obstacle between himself and his targets, preparing for the final phase of his assault. But instead of attacking the cadets directly, Jake did something unexpected. He began targeting the Academy's archives and libraries, the repositories of Veltar military knowledge and tradition. Centuries of accumulated wisdom burned in carefully controlled explosions, each blast erasing part of the Empire's institutional memory. "Your history calls this the Age of Expansion," Jake said as another archive exploded. "We call it the Age of Murder. Your heroes are war criminals. Your victories are genocides. And your empire is built on the bones of innocent people." In the Academy's main auditorium, senior instructor Kavrak gathered his staff and tried to maintain order. A grizzled veteran with scars from a dozen campaigns, he had fought humans before and knew their capabilities. But this was beyond anything he had experienced. "How many ships does he have out there?" one of the younger instructors asked, her voice shaking with fear. "On Kafrok replied grimly. "Just one. Impossible. The destruction we're seeing would require one ship," Kavrak repeated. "One human. And we can't touch him." The psychological impact was exactly what Jake had intended. The Veltar prided themselves on their military superiority, their technological advantages over other species. To be helpless against a single enemy vessel was destroying their fundamental beliefs about themselves and their empire. Jake's final demonstration was the most terrifying of all. He appeared directly outside the Academy's main viewport, his ship visible for exactly 10 seconds. The cadets and staff who saw it would never forget the sight. Sleek black hull that seemed to absorb light, weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, the sense of predatory intelligence that surrounded the vessel like an aura. Then, he was gone again, vanished into the darkness, as if he had never existed. "Remember this night," Jake said over the communication system. "Remember what it feels like to be powerless. When you become officers, when you're tempted to follow in your predecessor's footsteps, remember that someone is watching. Someone is keeping score. And someday, someone will come to collect the debt." The Academy's defenses were completely destroyed now, its patrol ships reduced to debris floating in space. Jake had accomplished his mission without killing a single cadet, but the psychological damage was immense. These young Veltar would carry the memory of this night for the rest of their lives, a permanent reminder that the Empire was not invincible. Jake opened one final channel to the Academy's command center. "Commandant Hextar," he said quietly, "you have 24 hours to evacuate this facility. After that, I'll return and finish what I started. But next time, I won't be so gentle." The Nemesis vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a broken academy and 3,000 terrified cadets who would never again believe in the Empire's invincibility. The psychological victory was complete, but Jake knew it was only the beginning. High Admiral Kesvara would be receiving reports of the Academy raid within hours. She would realize that her trap had failed, that her enemy had outmaneuvered her completely. The Empire's response would be swift and brutal, but it would also be predictable. Jake smiled grimly as he plotted his next destination. The Veltar were learning that this war had rules they didn't understand, fought by methods they couldn't counter. They had awakened something terrible when they murdered his family, and now they were beginning to comprehend the true cost of their actions. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just entering its most dangerous phase. Aboard the Stellar Dominance, High Admiral Kesvara received the news of the Academy raid with cold fury. Her carefully planned trap had been worthless, her massive fleet reduced to an expensive gesture while her enemy struck at will across the Empire. "Recall all ships," she ordered. "This human thinks he can terrorize our people and damage our morale. He's about to learn that the Empire doesn't respond to threats. It eliminates them." Her aide looked up nervously. "Admiral, where will you concentrate the fleet? We don't know where he'll strike next." Kesvara stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The human had demonstrated that he could appear anywhere, anytime, despite their best defensive efforts. Traditional tactics were useless against an enemy who refused to fight conventionally. "We're not going to chase him anymore," she said finally. "We're going to make him come to us. Send word to Fleet Command. I want authorization to implement Protocol 7. The aide went pale. Protocol 7 was the Empire's most extreme military doctrine, reserved for existential threats to imperial sovereignty. It had never been used before, not even during the worst rebellions or alien invasions. "Admiral," the aide said carefully, "Protocol 7 authorizes the complete destruction of enemy homeworlds." "Are you sure?" "The human wants to play psychological games," Kesvara interrupted. "He thinks he can terrorize us into submission. But two can play that game. Find me the location of his home colony. If he wants to make this personal, then personal it will be." Jake Morrison had declared war on the Veltar Empire. Now the Empire was about to declare war on humanity itself. The message reached Jake Morrison while he was resupplying at a hidden base in an abandoned asteroid field. The transmission came through emergency channels, encrypted with codes that only a handful of people knew. When Jake saw the sender's identification, his blood turned to ice. Admiral Chun, commanding officer of the Human Defense Force. The message was brief and to the point. Morrison, the Veltar are mobilizing their entire navy. They're coming for Earth. We need to talk. Jake stared at the transmission for a long moment, his mind processing the implications. He had known this day would come eventually, had always understood that his personal war might escalate beyond his ability to contain it. But seeing the reality spelled out in stark military language made his chest tighten with familiar guilt. Earth, 3 billion innocent people who had no idea that their lives hung in the balance because of one man's quest for vengeance. Jake opened a secure channel back to Admiral Chen. "I'm listening," he said simply. Chen's weathered face appeared on the holographic display, showing every one of his 60 years of military service. Behind him, Jake could see the bustle of a command center at full alert. Officers rushing between stations, tactical displays showing fleet movements, the organized chaos of a military preparing for war. "Morrison," Chun said without preamble, "what you've been doing out there has consequences. The Veltar have declared humanity a threat to imperial security. They're mobilizing everything, 5,000 ships from across their empire, all converging on our space." Jake felt the weight of those numbers settle on his shoulders. 5,000 ships. Even the Human Defense Force, with all their advanced technology and strategic advantages, couldn't hope to stand against a force that size. The Veltar were prepared to commit genocide to stop one man. "What do you want from me, Admiral?" Jake asked. "Surrender yourself," Chen replied bluntly. "The Veltar have offered terms. They'll call off the invasion if we hand you over for trial and execution. It's not ideal, but it's better than watching our species burn." Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking of his wife and daughter, of the path that had brought him to this moment. "And if I refuse, then we fight," Chen said simply, "and we lose. The mathematics are clear, Morrison. We can't win against those odds. But if there's a chance to save our people, I have to take it." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone in the silence of his ship. He sat in his command chair for hours, wrestling with the decision that would determine the fate of humanity. He had started this war to avenge his family, to make the Veltar pay for their crimes. But he had never intended for it to escalate to this level. "Jake," Sarah's voice whispered through the speakers, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I wanted justice for what they did to us. But not at the cost of our entire species." "Maybe there's another way," Sarah suggested. "You spent 5 years learning their weaknesses. You know things about the Veltar that no one else does. Maybe that knowledge can save humanity." Jake pulled up everything he had learned about the Empire during his campaign of vengeance. Fleet compositions, command structures, technological capabilities, psychological profiles of key leaders. Most importantly, he understood their pride, their rigid adherence to doctrine, their inability to comprehend enemies who fought outside their predetermined parameters. An idea began forming in his mind, desperate and dangerous but possibly viable. The Veltar were mobilizing their entire navy for this invasion, stripping defenses from across their empire. They were so focused on destroying one human ship that they had created vulnerabilities elsewhere. What if he gave them exactly what they wanted? Jake began transmitting on open channels, broadcasting on frequencies that he knew the Veltar monitored. His message was simple and direct. "Admiral Kesvara, this is Jake Morrison. You want me? Come and get me." He included coordinates for a system on the edge of human space, a place where the Veltar could bring their entire fleet without threatening Earth directly. Then he set course for those coordinates, pushing the Nemesis to its maximum speed. 3 days later, High Admiral Kesvar's invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the designated coordinates. The sight was terrifying in its majesty. 5,000 warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of the system's distant star. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the galaxy, enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. At the center of the formation hung the Stellar Dominance, Kesvara's flagship. The massive dreadnought was a monument to Veltar engineering, armed with weapons that could crack planets, and shielded by defensive systems that had never been breached. Kesvara stood on its bridge, her 4 eyes scanning the tactical display for any sign of her enemy. "Admiral," her sensor officer reported, "I'm detecting one small vessel at the system's edge. Configuration matches the target ship." Kesvara smiled grimly. After months of hunting shadows, she finally had her enemy exactly where she wanted him. "Signal the fleet. Form attack formation Alpha 7. We end this now." But Jake Morrison wasn't running. The Nemesis hung in space, all stealth systems offline, broadcasting on open frequencies. Jake sat in his command chair, watching 5,000 enemy ships moving toward him with murderous intent. By every calculation, every tactical analysis, he should have been dead already. One ship against 5,000 was not a battle, it was suicide. Unless you understood that sometimes the greatest victories came from apparent defeat. "Attention Veltar fleet," Jake broadcast as the enemy ships closed in. "This is Jake Morrison, the one you call the Reaper. You brought your entire navy to kill one human. Impressive. But before you destroy me, there's something you should know." Kesvara paused the fleet's advance, curious despite herself. "What could you possibly have to say that would matter now, human?" Jake's reply was calm and professional, carrying the weight of absolute confidence. "While you've been chasing me across the galaxy, while you've stripped defenses from every world in your empire to bring 5,000 ships to kill one man, other humans have been busy. Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time you received a status report from your homeworld?" The bridge of the stellar dominance fell silent as the implications of Jake's words sank in. Kesvara spun toward her communications officer. "Contact Fleet Command. I want immediate status reports from all core worlds." The officer's hands flew over a console, sending urgent messages across subspace. The replies came back within minutes, each one confirming Kesvara's worst fears. Communication blackouts, missing patrol squadrons, silent defense platforms. While the Imperial Navy had been mobilizing its forces for the invasion of human space, the Human Defense Force had been implementing a plan 5 years in the making. Jake Morrison had never been working alone. He had been gathering intelligence, mapping Veltar defenses, and preparing for exactly this moment. "Impossible, Kesvara whispered. Our homeworlds are impregnable. No human fleet could—" "You're right," Jake interrupted. "No human fleet could break your defenses. But you taught us something valuable about warfare, Admiral. Sometimes the best way to win is not to fight at all." The truth hit Kesvara like a physical blow. The humans hadn't attacked the Veltar homeworlds. They had infiltrated them. Years of careful preparation, agents placed in key positions, sleeper programs inserted into critical systems. While the Empire's attention was focused on one man and his ship, humanity had been preparing to cut out the heart of their civilization. "You have a choice, Admiral," Jake continued, his voice carrying across 5,000 ships. "You can stay here and destroy me, prove your military might by killing one enemy vessel. But while you're celebrating your victory, human strike teams will be systematically dismantling everything you've built. Your government centers, your military commands, your industrial bases, all of it will burn while your fleet is light years away." Kesvara stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through the implications. If the humans had really infiltrated the core worlds, if they were prepared to strike at the Empire's foundation, then this entire invasion was a trap. The humans had used their greatest strength, Jake Morrison himself, as bait to draw the Imperial Navy away from where it was needed most. "Or," Jake said quietly, "you can accept my surrender." The words echoed across the fleet, transmitted to every ship, heard by every crew member. The Reaper, the ghost who had terrorized the Empire for months, was offering to give himself up voluntarily. In exchange for what? Kesvara asked suspiciously. "A treaty," Jake replied. "Recognition of human sovereignty. An end to imperial expansion into our space. And, most importantly, a promise that what happened to New Hope will never happen again." Kesvara laughed bitterly. You think the Empire negotiates with terrorists? You think we'll give you concessions because you threaten us? I don't think you have a choice, Jake said simply. Your empire is strong, Admiral, but it's built on fear and conquest. Take away the fear. Show your people that you can be defeated, and how long before your subject worlds start demanding their freedom? The truth of it was undeniable. The Veltar Empire held dozens of species in subjugation, maintained control through the threat of overwhelming force. If word spread that a single human had brought the Imperial Navy to its knees, if subject worlds realized that the Empire could be challenged successfully, rebellions would spring up across the galaxy. You have 1 hour to decide, Jake announced. After that, the human strike teams begin their work. And, Admiral, if anything happens to Earth, if you try to carry out your invasion plans despite this offer, I promise you that the Empire will burn. Every world, every station, every ship. I've spent 5 years preparing for this war, and I'm not done yet. The transmission ended, leaving Kesvara staring at the tactical display that showed one small human ship surrounded by the entire Imperial Navy. She had come here to end the threat of the Reaper once, and, for all, to prove that no one could challenge the Empire's might. Instead, she was facing the possibility of the Empire's complete collapse. Her communications officer looked up nervously. Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the core territories. The humans weren't bluffing. There are sabotage teams in position at critical locations throughout the Empire. Kesvara closed her 4 eyes, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. She had 2 choices: destroy Jake Morrison and watch her empire burn from within, or accept his terms and admit that the mighty Veltar could be defeated by inferior beings. Pride warred with pragmatism in her mind. The Empire had spent centuries building its reputation on invincibility, on the assumption that superior technology and numbers would always prevail. To negotiate with the humans would be an admission of weakness that might encourage other species to challenge imperial authority. But the alternative was unthinkable. If the core worlds fell, if the government collapsed, millions of Veltar would die in the resulting chaos. And Jake Morrison had demonstrated that he was perfectly capable of making good on his threats. Signal the human ship, she said finally, each word tasting like poison in her mouth. We'll discuss terms. The negotiation took place over secure channels, with Admiral Chun representing humanity while Jake Morrison remained silent, his very presence a reminder of what the Empire faced if talks failed. The terms were surprisingly reasonable. Humanity would maintain sovereignty over its existing territories. The Veltar would withdraw from human space, and both sides would establish a neutral zone to prevent future conflicts. In exchange, the human sabotage teams would stand down, and Jake Morrison would surrender himself for a public trial that would demonstrate the Empire's continued strength. Unacceptable, Chin said immediately. Morrison is a human citizen operating under our authority. We don't surrender our people to foreign powers. Then, there is no deal, Kesvara replied. The Empire cannot be seen as weak. We must have some demonstration of our strength. It was Jake who provided the solution. Admiral Chun, he said, speaking for the first time during the negotiations, I have a proposal. The terms of Jake's counteroffer were elegant in their simplicity. He would submit to imperial justice, but the trial would take place on neutral ground with representatives from both governments present. The proceedings would be broadcast across the galaxy, showing that the Empire was strong enough to capture the notorious Reaper while also demonstrating humanity's willingness to cooperate with galactic law. More importantly, Jake would use the trial as a platform to tell his story, to explain why he had chosen the path of vengeance, and what had driven him to challenge the Empire. The galaxy would hear about New Hope, about the innocent civilians killed for the crime of existing, about the price of unchecked aggression. It's a risk, Chen warned during a private channel. Once you're in their custody, we can't protect you. I know, Jake replied, but this is bigger than one man's life. This is about making sure what happened to my family never happens again. The trial took place 3 months later on the neutral world of Meridian Station. The courtroom was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all eager to witness the fate of the human who had single-handedly challenged the galaxy's greatest empire. Jake Morrison stood in the defendant's dock, wearing simple civilian clothes instead of his notorious black armor. To the observers, he looked ordinary, unremarkable, just another human facing the consequences of his actions. But his testimony changed everything. For 6 hours, Jake spoke about new hope, about his family, about the path that had led him from grieving husband to the galaxy's most feared operative. He detailed every Veltar atrocity he had uncovered, every innocent world that had suffered under Imperial expansion, every family torn apart by the Empire's hunger for conquest. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, and Jake's words reached billions of beings who had never heard the truth about the Empire's expansion. Subject worlds learned that resistance was possible. Neutral species realized that they might be next if the Veltar continued their aggressive expansion. Most importantly, the Empire's own citizens heard the truth about their government's actions. The verdict was predetermined. Jake Morrison was found guilty of terrorism and sentenced to life imprisonment. But the damage to the Empire's reputation was irreversible. Rebellions broke out across a dozen worlds. Trade relationships soured as neutral species distanced themselves from the Empire. Internal dissent grew as Veltar citizens questioned whether their government's actions truly represented their values. Jake served his sentence in an Imperial prison, treated with the grudging respect due a worthy enemy. He used his time to write, documenting everything he had learned about the Empire's weaknesses and the methods that had allowed one man to challenge an entire galactic power. His writings were smuggled out and distributed across human space, becoming the foundation for new military doctrines and resistance strategies. When the Empire finally collapsed 10 years later, torn apart by internal rebellions and external pressures, historians would point to Jake Morrison's trial as the beginning of the end. On the day Jake was released, part of a prisoner exchange following the Empire's dissolution, he stood on the docking bay of Meridian Station and looked out at the stars. His war was over, his family's death finally, avenged not through violence, but through the slow erosion of the system that had killed them. "What will you do now?" Admiral Chen asked, standing beside him as they watched ships from dozens of species move freely through what had once been Imperial space. Jake smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I'm going home," he said simply. "It's time to build something instead of tearing things down." As his transport lifted off from the station, Jake Morrison, no longer the Reaper, no longer a weapon of vengeance, closed his eyes and thought of his wife and daughter. He had kept his promise to them and made their deaths mean something. The galaxy was a freer place because of their sacrifice, and that would have to be enough. The war was over. It was time to live.